Denmark is one of the most heavily taxed countries in the entire world, if not the most heavily taxed. It's famous again for its taxes, which included some experiments as the short-lived fat tax, for example, that made everything from milk to butter and meat more expensive. Today I'll tell you 7 taxes that are so hard to get your head around that many people in Denmark even openly voice their disagreement with. And if you're new here, my name is Mario, and on this channel I help people living in Denmark to make the most from their money. Number 1, I want to talk about the lagerbeskatning, which is the tax on unrealized gains. In every other country in the world, when you buy an asset, say an index fund or a stock fund, you only pay capital gains on the sale of the investment. So for example, if you buy a stock or a fund for 1,000 and it goes up to 1,500, you need to pay tax on this gain the moment you sell the investment. So if you buy a fund for 1,000 and it goes up to 1,500, you will only pay tax on this 500 krona gain the moment you sell this investment. And this is not the case in Denmark. For index funds, which are again the most common investing vehicle for basically everyone or the common people, you'll pay a tax on that 5 krona gain even if you don't sell, one way or the other. And there's literally no other country that does the same. So 0. This is absolute BS. So to put it into perspective, what would be the case if you have a house that you bought it for 5 million. Now, because the market has been going strong, it has gone up in value to 6 million. And at the end of the year, Scott would say, hey, your house is worth 6 million now. So you need to pay me taxes on this 1 million gain. And basically like 42% of that. Just imagine that, but multiply it for basically all the other assets. Thankfully, not for the house, but then for investments, that's the way it is actually here in Denmark. And it's crazy. And the key thing here is that the lagerbeskatning doesn't only apply for index funds. So for example, if you're an entrepreneur and you have a company that does an IPO, meaning that your company goes public, you could end up owing Scott millions again on this unrealized gain. So there was an example, I'm gonna link it down in the video description and you can see it over here, of a guy who owes Scott 22 million kroner and basically has no way to pay that in the world because basically he had his company go public, he couldn't sell the stock because he had like vesting period, and Scott said, okay, your value of the company now went to this, and then you need to pay me like 22 million taxes, which is absolutely insane. So if you have a big investment portfolio and you're moving to Denmark, you will be in for a big surprise. Number 2 is a pension lagerbeskatning. So in Denmark, your pension investments are also taxed, and this is unlike every other country in the world as far as I know. When you have money in your Danish pension, so once you take out the money from your from your income and then you put it into a pension account and not cash it out, you'll still have to pay gains on like a taxes on the gains of the pension fund each year. And of course, being in Denmark, that's again on lagerbeskatning. Your pension will be taxed at 15 to 17% on unrealized gains each year, which is again crazy. All else equal, it would mean that it will take longer for you to come to retirement because of that. And again, what else can you do? I'd rather do this, and have the money in the pension. But again, like this is just insane. It means that you need to put a lot of money into the pension, and that still gets in taxes. Number 3 is the ejendomsværdiskatt. Because thankfully there's no lagerbeskatning for houses, else people would just go bankrupt. But instead what the government does is to tax you twice on the house. So one is on the value of the land the house sits, and then one more time on the value of the property itself. And this second tax is called the ejendomsværdiskatt, and as you can guess, it can go up more or less depending on the value of the property. The more expensive your property, the higher this tax. So look, this is not an insane amount of money, but it's a tax that is used as a justification for the one only loophole in the Danish system, which is that you're not taxed on the capital gains on the sale of your primary home. So while you're taxed on the unrealized gains of your investments, if you buy a house for 5 million and you sell it for 6 million or even 10 million, this, for example, if you sell for 10 million, this 5 million krona in gain is for you tax-free because in principle you paid for it with the ejendomsværdiskatt. So this is the number 1 way for people living in Denmark to build wealth, and in effect is the way that rich people in Denmark use to get richer, because the way you can get rich in Denmark, and all explained in the video over here, is that you buy the most expensive house you can afford and then sell that tax-free when it goes up in value, and then wash, rinse, repeat. How much you can afford to buy a house will depend on how much banks are willing to loan you, and the loan will also depend on how high your yearly income is. So if you have a fancy job with a high salary, you'll have more money to buy a house and then more money to play this leverage game. So it's interesting that in Denmark, that is a very egalitarian society, you have a setup like this where you still have this tax chipping away money each year, but then not tax on the sale, which means that again, some people in Denmark are accumulating a lot of wealth. And I can even say myself, I know in the system, I also bought the most expensive apartment I could, and now when the money has gone up, it has been good for my own personal finances. Again, in a egalitarian context, doesn't make sense. What also doesn't make sense are the car taxes. And look, I don't have a car, and I'm glad that in Copenhagen you can have an amazing life without having a car. And I'm fully on board with that. That said, the taxes on car are insane. So there's specifically a registration tax or something like that goes up from 85 to 150% of the price of the car. And this is, super high. And that's why you have so few nice or expensive cars in Denmark, despite being a really rich country. And the crazy thing about it is that you pay this tax of, let's say, 150 or whatever, and then you need to pay an extra 25% on top of that as the, VAT, like as the sales tax, which is crazy. And I think very few other countries have this tax on top of tax setup. Well, but that's the way it is in Denmark. And look, I'm all on board with this green transition. And again, I don't have a car, I don't want a car, but I still think the obsession that Danish society has with cars, and especially with nice cars, is just amusing. Again, this is not about being green and cars pollute and so on. Just for context, there was an opt-out for the electric vehicles from some of these taxes, but fast forward now, the moment the Teslas became popular, these taxes also started to be applied for EVs as well. So hence, anytime you want to have an expensive car in Denmark, you need to pay a lot of money. One of the things as well that makes it really interesting, that it's more expensive to even have a company car than your own car, in the sense of like the taxes you need to pay for it. So it just things like this and make you wow. And I don't see this changing anytime soon. If you want a car in Denmark, make sure you really need this, because it's going to cost you dearly, especially if it's a nice car. Number 5 is the old media license. And this one thankfully got repealed and transformed into something else, but it was something that just made you wrap your head around and hate the world kind of. And that's why I wanted to keep it here. So in Denmark, only up to 2-3 years ago, if you had a TV at home, you had to pay a media license that was used to support the Danish broadcaster DR and some other cultural stuff. If you're like me, who have no TV at home, I never had a TV, it was fine until DR decided that even if you had internet at home or a phone that you could just basically access internet, then you would scope to get this media license, which is absolute BS. And what made it the most ridiculous was that DR would send people to your house to actually investigate and check whether you had a TV or not. And I know from someone that basically when this DR person came in to check, they basically gave them the TV away, just take it away, I don't want to pay you this tax. So yeah, that's the way it was. Thankfully it's not like this anymore. And what made it the most BS possible, even you could say, was again this: you had the same tax on top of tax. So if the license was like 1,000 krona per quarter or something like that, then you paid 25% of BNT on top of that. So again, you pay a tax and then you pay another tax on top of it, which is just nuts. Thankfully, this got repealed and no tears were shed by anyone in Denmark when DR got a 20% budget reduction. Number 6 are the excise duties on coffee. So there is something called excise duties, and these are a kind of tax that is usually added to things governments want to artificially make more expensive. So things that they want to disincentivize people to buy. And this is, for example, alcohol or tobacco, packaging, gambling, sugary beverages, fossil fuels. And again, in principle, all these are things that it makes sense to discourage. It's a bit of a nanny state, in my opinion, to have these type of things. But again, if it makes people drink less, if it makes people smoke less, not to gamble, you could say, okay, that's a good thing for society. But Denmark has the excise duties on coffee as well. And that explains partly why coffee is so expensive in Denmark. I don't really understand this, as in principle, I didn't hear about any government or NGO or anyone saying we should drink less coffee. It just seems to be a money grab. And again, it doesn't fit with a pattern, but again, alas, it's taxed. And just to clarify, this is a tax that is distinct from the VAT. So when you buy a coffee, you'll pay, in a way, this excise duty, the creation of the coffee, and then a VAT on top of that. And number 7 is the most crazy one, and this is the exit tax. So if you're a resident in Denmark and plan to ever leave Denmark, you need to know there's a exit tax. And it's, of course, lagerbeskatning, just to make it more fun. So what it means in practice is that if you have any asset, like a stock or a bond, and crucially, business shares as well, you'll be taxed on the unrealized gains you had in those assets from the moment you got them or the moment you entered Denmark until the moment you leave Denmark, even if you don't sell. I knew this was the case with stocks and index funds and the like, and in a way it's okay. I mean, it makes sense. It's not the only country in the world that does this, but the crucial thing is that it also applies for business shares as well. So if you, for example, start your APS, which costs like 40,000 krona to start, and your IPS is now worth, according to an auditor and the state, not by you, by professionals here, they say that your IPS is worth 5 million krona. The moment you leave Denmark or you stop being a tax resident in Denmark, you need to pay up to 42% of that 5 million krona gain, or 4 million krona minus 40,000 gain to skat. So basically, you either need to get a loan to pay that to SCAT, or close the company, and still there's some shenanigans about closing the company, sell a percentage of the company, or somehow get money out of your hat. You know, it's pretty complicated. There's a bit more nuance into this, but in all, it makes Denmark a terrible country to be an entrepreneur unless you never ever want to leave the country. I have been raving a lot about different taxes here, but again, what we get out of all these taxes is that you get a beautiful welfare state where we can again see benefits for the whole of the society. But I'm confident that these 7 specifically don't make such a big impact on the state coffers, or at least they're not going to make so much of an impact as the 25% VAT or the income taxes. Next, incredibly, there are things that are not taxed in Denmark at all, and in this video I tell you about that, and in the video over here I tell you things that are fully free. Thanks for watching.